Hey guys, so I've been having some significant issues when traveling, not just in the US, but all over the world. And what I did was I filed a complaint with a few agencies to see what's going on. I've done this before, none of them have given me any information. Now, this particular letter is more recent, and I wanted to just sort of use it as a point of discussion. So you'll see right here that there is something called a redress inquiry program. And that's what you want to use, right? So I applied for a global entry program and I was rejected, not once, but twice. No information was given to me about the reasons for the rejection. I was only told that, same thing that they're telling me here, that you do not meet the guidelines for program participation. There's no specific guideline that they're telling me about. And these people have had a chance to investigate the same people who told me that I did not meet the guidelines. So what did they do? They did a investigation after careful review, and all they did was they repeated to me the reason that I was denied, that I was the same reason I was given by the guys before them. So you can see that, there is no careful review. That's a joke. And I guess I'm channeling some of my George Carlin here, so bear with me. So that's, again, not a whole lot going on. At least they figured out that I am also requesting a review with the CBP Ombudsman. And that's really the only independent person within these agencies that would be able to do anything. I suppose, it might be your best bet. And this is, I'm still waiting to hear back. It's going to take probably a little bit longer to hear back. So what's really interesting, let's just take a look here. This is from not a low-level employee, but a chief and the head, one of the head honchos. And you can see that there are a number of mistakes, just basic English mistakes. And English is my second language. And you look over here, I mean, obviously not anymore, but, it's, you can see right here that nation does not need to be capitalized. Same thing with government agencies. And, that's, again, these should not be capitalized. When you capitalize it, what you're doing is you're substituting a synonym for the actual name of the country. So this one would be saying protecting our America's borders. That doesn't really make any sense. You would say protecting America's borders. It's just very basic things that I knew when I was in 8th grade in this country, or probably even earlier. But again, I don't tend to point these things out if I'm dealing with a low-level employee. If I'm dealing with somebody that's low-level, I understand, the system in place. And quite frankly, I blame the teachers and the educational system, not themselves. But we're dealing with a chief, okay? Now, check it out. It gets even better. Again, this is a fairly recent communication, November 10th, 2021. So it tells you that, despite the careful review, despite all these other, obvious mistakes, they seem to be proud that only about 2% of the complainants have some connection to a terrorist watch list. Now, that doesn't sound like a high number, but remember that when you go to an airport, how many people do you see traveling with Middle Eastern last names? And, after 9/11, in fact, the DHS is a creation of a policy after 9/11. So obviously it was designed essentially to target Muslims. There's been a lot of litigation on that point. So that's not, it's not at issue. The question is whether the lawyers have done their job in creating a check and balance against the executive branch's, predilection to overreaching and overextension. And again, about 2% seems like a low number, but when you go to an airport, how many people there do you see that you think have Middle Eastern last names? And I'm guessing, a very small percentage. So we're dealing, at best, if you're outside of Michigan, you're probably dealing with, maybe only 10% of the people you see in the airports, or even much, much less, quite frankly, because the Muslim population in America is extremely small. I don't think it's going to be anywhere from, 2 to 8% at most, depending on where you are. And so you're actually looking at, so this 2%, right, is it's 2 out of every 100 complainants. And so you can then look at, all right, well, we've got the people who are complaining. These people are probably are at least somewhat fluent in English. They're able to access a computer. So, you get those numbers that, we don't know exactly how those numbers would work out. But the fact that 2% of the complainants have some connection, if you narrow that down, it's probably a lot higher when you're dealing with somebody with a Middle Eastern last name. And we don't know what that number is. I would be speculating if I said 30% or 20%. But the fact of the matter is, we do know that 2% is actually a high number because we know about the history of the DHS. We know why it was made, and we know the policies under which it operates. And, this is in conjunction with an obvious, simple mistake on the first page that I showed you. And, you can see that we're not dealing with the most meticulous agency, even at the very high levels. So you can only imagine what's happening at the low levels. And, why does this matter? Well, it matters because, you talk about, say, a contrast between, this country and other countries about, what happens in star chambers in other countries. We used to complain that the Soviet Union was not transparent. Well, and one of the reasons that we point that out is because the Soviet Union broke up, and it broke up because it did not have any sort of social cohesion, in part because of the way that it was treating outsiders, despite the fact that it was, those outsiders were under its protection and jurisdiction. So when we talk about minorities, why do minorities matter? Why do you even want minorities in your country? One of the reasons is so that you can see whether or not the principles that you claim are being applied properly and adequately. And when they're not being applied properly and adequately, the whole idea is that the minority, whether it's a Muhammad Ali or a Malcolm X, will be able to point that out to you and allow you to take action. And remember, it was Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X that correctly analyzed the Vietnam War, correctly figured out that it was going to be a failure of colossal proportions for the United States. And, it wasn't the Rand Institute, it wasn't the military. And in fact, the vice president at the time, one of them, I believe, was it Humphreys? I don't remember the name. But, there are internal letters, again, lack of transparency, where they're even saying that we don't have support for this war, we need to get out. And that letter, I believe, was about 10 years before the last man left Vietnam, the last American service member left Vietnam. So you see that one of the reasons you want transparency is so especially in a democratic system, is so that you don't end up with a situation where the higher-ups are able to access information that is different from what is being presented to voters at the lower levels. And certainly when you have people making spelling mistakes, you've got, it's not spelling mistakes, but grammatical mistakes, you've got a problem. And it's even more problematic when all they're doing is, after careful review, simply, just giving me the same line that was given to me before. So we talk about communism, we talk about capitalism, and it doesn't matter from the perspective of the minority if people are incompetent. If the government that you live under is incompetent or negligent, it's the same effect on the ground floor. And the effect is discrimination. And the only question is, how easy is it to figure out how to, go to the other branches of government? In other words, move away from the executive branch and go into the other branches of government and, get some sort of redress, right? And in this case, it's difficult. I happen to have a background in law. I would have 60 days to review it with the United States Court of Appeals. I don't know. They're not giving you an address. I mean, there are a lot of Court of Appeals. They're not even making an attempt to help you here, right? And so I've seen the decisions, all that have come out of the D.C. Court of Appeals. All of them essentially uphold, national security concerns. In other words, you don't have to be transparent because of national security. And again, this is something we used to call other countries that did this. We used to call them star chambers. We used to call them undemocratic. We used to call them corrupt. And so to the extent that you think that this country is dramatically different from, a lot of other countries that have allowed the executive branch, particularly the military, to take over security, it's something you might want to think about and try to connect it to whether or not social cohesion is still on the way up or on the way down between everyone who lives within our borders. And, you've got to sort of, look at some other issues. And here's a bit of here's one thing I can recommend if you are caught in this sort of issue. Obviously, you still have to go to the executive branch and try to figure out what's going on over there. I would suggest you file a Freedom of Information request online to get information from the agency that you believe is incompetent or simply not doing this job. And that would be a starting point. Obviously, then you would try to contact the agency and see what they say. But unfortunately, because these guys are under the executive branch, they're not really going to help you. And again, that's really unfortunate that I'm saying that, but that's just the way it is, as you can see. And so what you want to do is you actually want to go to the lawyers. And the one that you want to go to the extent that you fall under the jurisdiction would be the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. And that is again, you just have to find all these things. And again, if I didn't have a background in law, I wouldn't be able to look up these code sections. USC is United States Code. I wouldn't be able to do these things and try to figure it out. But this is actually, as you might imagine, a perfect letter. It not only addresses what I'm talking about, it even tells you the other forms of jurisdiction that the agency or that the department within the agency has. And so again, you're dealing with a different caliber. It's not signed, interestingly, so that's interesting. And it even solicits information. If you believe as a victim of such a reprisal, please contact us immediately. So not only does it say we cover all these other issues, even the ones you didn't talk about, but we are on the lookout for retaliation. So you can see right away there's a difference between the lawyers and the executives, between these two different branches. And there's supposed to be a difference, but not to the point where, the average American can't go in and try to figure out how to get redress and has to go through an alphabet soup of agencies and departments to try to figure out what's going on. But that's the situation we have here in the United States. If you think that this is a country that this is how a free country is supposed to operate, that's fine. That's your opinion. But to the extent that you think that social cohesion requires some sort of buy-in, some sort of equivalent loyalty to the principles of government between both the minorities and the majority, then I think that this very simple case should give you some pause, or at least food for thought.